The ancient city of Alexandria rose on Egypt's coast as a shining experiment. A place where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and Eastern ideas collided in a single global crossroads. At its heart stood the Library of Alexandria, a legendary institution that tried something astonishing for its time: to collect all the knowledge of the known world in one place. Founded under the Ptolemaic kings, likely Ptolemy I and II, the library was part of a larger complex called the Mauseon, a temple of the Muses dedicated to learning. Ships arriving in Alexandria's bustling harbor were reportedly searched for scrolls. Any manuscripts found were originals were kept, and copies returned to the owners. The library's shelves held works of philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, drama, and poetry, written in multiple languages and gathered from every corner of the Mediterranean. Great thinkers like Euclid, Eratosthenes, Archimedes, and possibly even early physicians worked in or with Alexandria, turning the library into a living laboratory for scientific discovery. Eratosthenes famously used shadows and geometry to calculate Earth's circumference with incredible accuracy, proving that the library was not just storing books, but actively generating new knowledge. Scholars there compared different versions of Homer's epics, edited texts, and created critical editions, laying foundations for philology, textual criticism, and systematic scholarship. In medicine, Alexandrian anatomists studied the human body through dissection, writing detailed treatises that influenced later Greek, Roman, and Islamic physicians for centuries. The library also gathered administrative records, travel accounts, and geographic surveys, making it a strategic information center for rulers planning trade, taxation, and diplomacy. To manage this ocean of knowledge, librarians developed early catalogs and classification systems, assigning works to topics and authors, an ancestor of modern library organization. But such a concentration of power and information made the library vulnerable. It depended on royal funding, political stability, and the fragile peace of a competitive ancient world. The first alleged blow came during Julius Caesar's civil war in 48 BCE, when he was cornered in Alexandria and set fire to ships in the harbor as a defensive tactic. Ancient sources suggest the flames spread to nearby warehouses that stored scrolls, possibly destroying collections linked to the library or its auxiliary facilities. Some later writers claimed this fire burned the entire Library of Alexandria to the ground, but the evidence is mixed, and the institution likely survived in some form. In the centuries after Caesar, Alexandria remained an intellectual center. New scholars came, and learning continued, suggesting the library or its traditions were still alive. Another possible disaster occurred during the 3rd century CE, when Emperor Aurelian fought to reclaim the city from the Palmyrene Queen Zenobia, devastating key districts. The fighting heavily damaged the Brachion, the royal quarter where the main library complex probably stood, hinting that large parts of the original institution were destroyed then. By this time, however, knowledge in Alexandria was not confined to a single building. Satellite collections, private libraries, and the Serapeum Temple likely preserved many texts. The Serapeum, dedicated to the god Serapis, hosted a subsidiary library associated with the main collection, acting as a kind of backup archive and scholarly center. In 391 CE, under Emperor Theodosius and the prefect Theophilus, pagan temples were outlawed. The Serapeum was attacked and demolished during violent religious conflicts. Many historians believe that any remaining library collections stored inside the Serapeum were either scattered, destroyed, or repurposed during this wave of anti-pagan violence. This event marked a turning point. The old pagan intellectual infrastructure of Alexandria was being dismantled as Christianity became the dominant force in the empire. Centuries later, medieval writers told another dramatic story, that during the Arab conquest of Egypt, Caliph Umar allegedly ordered remaining books burned because the Quran was sufficient. Modern historians widely consider this tale a legend, created long after the events, with no contemporary evidence to support such a massive, deliberate book. By the time Arab armies entered Alexandria in the 7th century, much of the library's infrastructure was likely already gone, eroded by earlier wars, neglect, and religious conflicts. Instead of a single apocalyptic fire, the Library of Alexandria probably died by many cuts. Political turmoil, shifting funding, religious tensions, and simple decay over several centuries. Scrolls, unlike modern printed books, were fragile, without careful copying and maintenance. They could mold, crumble, or be eaten by insects, silently erasing whole fields of knowledge. As regimes changed, priorities shifted. New rulers sometimes saw little value in preserving older texts, especially those written in foreign languages or associated with rival cultures. Some works were deliberately destroyed as heretical or pagan. Others were simply ignored until they rotted, lost in storerooms, private collections, or damp cellars. Meanwhile, the intellectual world itself was changing. Centers of learning emerged in Rome, Constantinople, and later in Baghdad, shifting attention away from Alexandria's fading glory. The irony is that even as Alexandria's library declined, its idea spread. The belief that a state could sponsor large-scale, organized research and preserve knowledge for future generations. Many texts once housed in Alexandria survived because copies had already traveled elsewhere to other libraries in the Greek East, to Rome, or later to monastics. Still, countless works were never duplicated widely. Entire plays by Sophocles and Aeschylus, treatises by mathematicians, and histories of lost kingdoms likely vanished forever. We know they existed only because later authors mentioned them, citing titles, summaries, or quoting small fragments preserved in their own writings. As a result, the Library of Alexandria has become a symbol of cultural memory. Not just what we know, but the vast universe of what we once knew and then forgot. Modern people often imagine the library as a single grand building with endless marble halls. But in reality, it may have been a cluster of spaces spread across the royal quarter. Some collections were likely inside palace complexes, others in temple annexes or dedicated halls, giving the project redundancy, but also more points of vulnerability. Its librarians, such as Callimachus, compiled massive catalogs, listing authors, works, and subject fields, demonstrating a sophisticated attempt to map human knowledge itself through translation efforts, especially from Egyptian, Hebrew, and other local languages into Greek. The library served as a bridge between cultures, not just a warehouse of Greek texts. One famous project associated with Alexandria is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, reflecting the city's diverse Jewish community and intellectual climate. This atmosphere of cosmopolitan scholarship made Alexandria both powerful and politically sensitive, especially when imperial and religious authorities wanted tighter control over ideas. Over time, tensions between pagans, Jews, and Christians erupted into riots, purges, and retaliatory violence, often targeting not just people, but their books and sacred spaces. In such an environment, a library was never just a neutral archive. It represented competing visions of truth, philosophical, theological, and scientific. The story of the library's loss therefore mirrors a larger question. How do societies treat ideas that challenge authority, tradition, or religious certainty? Some later writers transformed the library's destruction into a moral warning, blaming conquering armies, religious fanatics, or careless rulers for the loss of priceless wisdom. But reality is more complex. The decline of the Library of Alexandria was entangled with imperial collapse, economic hardship, technological limits, and the fragility of ancient media. If the library had survived intact, our understanding of ancient science, engineering, literature, and philosophy might be radically different and, perhaps far more advanced. We might possess detailed records of lost inventions, alternative mathematical systems, or even early experiments that anticipated later breakthroughs in astronomy or mechanics. We cannot know exactly what was lost, but the silence in the record gaps in chains of thought, missing works by known authors, is itself a haunting testimony. Today, scholars use fragments, quotations, and archaeological remains to reconstruct the intellectual world that once passed through Alexandria's shelves. In doing so, they treat the library less as a murdered institution and more as a stage in a longer history of knowledge, one that includes survival, migration, and transformation. Ideas once preserved in Alexandria reappeared later in surprising places, in Byzantine commentaries, in Arabic translations, and in Latin manuscripts copied by medieval monks. This zigzag journey of preservation shows that knowledge rarely follows a straight line. It breaks, reforms, and shifts hands across cultures through time. The myth of a single catastrophic fire oversimplifies the story, but persists because it is emotionally powerful, a clean narrative of arrogance, loss, and regret. Yet the true lesson of the Library of Alexandria lies in something subtler: how neglect, intolerance, and short-term thinking can erode even the greatest achievements of human curiosity. In the digital age, we like to believe our information is safe in clouds and servers. But data can still be lost to war, censorship, decay, and technological obsolescence. Thinking about Alexandria forces us to ask, what knowledge are we failing to preserve today? And what future questions might we be silently preventing from being answered? The library's ambition to collect all human knowledge still inspires modern institutions like national libraries, archives, and open access digital projects. At the same time, it warns that centralization without resilience can be dangerous. When one hub falls, everything depending on it risks collapsing at once. For historians, the Library of Alexandria is both a real place and a metaphor. A reminder of how much of the past we have already lost and how much is still at risk. The ruins of ancient Alexandria do not reveal a single charred library hall, but scattered traces of scholarly life woven into the city's broader urban fabric. Standing on that coastline today, it is difficult to imagine the shelves of papyrus scrolls that once stood there, humming with voices from many cultures. What survives is the dream that a society can value knowledge enough to gather it, protect it, and share it across borders and generations. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but its spirit survives wherever people dedicate themselves to preserving ideas against the forces that would erase them. In the end, its story is not just about what burned or crumbled. It is about the ongoing struggle between memory and forgetting in human civilization. Every time we digitize a manuscript, translate an old text, or support open access to research, we push back slightly against the fate that befell Alexandria. And every time we censor, neglect, or underfund institutions of learning, we replay, in quieter form, the long, slow unmaking of the ancient world's greatest library. The Library of Alexandria's true legacy is a question it leaves us with. Will we guard our knowledge more carefully than the empires that let theirs fade into ash and silence?